A dead heat in Israel looks set to hand Benjamin Netanyahu an unprecedented fifth term. Did his gamble with the far right pay off? And will he now follow through with the controversial policies he promised? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is the Israeli election. Despite a potential indictment for corruption, Benjamin Netanyahu is poised to become Israel's longest-serving prime minister. And while his Likud party is in a virtual tie with the rival Blue and White Alliance, Netanyahu has positioned himself to form a coalition with the far right. But to get there, he had to make promises on the campaign trail that could end all hopes for a Palestinian state. His boldest, vowing to annex the settlements in the occupied West Bank. And sure enough, another 3,500 illegal settlements were approved just over the weekend. So no matter how the final votes are tallied, could the real losers be the Palestinians? Ranof Nogel has more.
Supporters sing, "Bibi is the King of Israel." Bibi, the nickname of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, is one of affection. But conferring the title of king can mean very different things. It can be a term of triumph or of tyranny. This closely contested election was widely seen as a referendum on Netanyahu's character. He faces possible indictment in 3 corruption cases. Despite that, Netanyahu is now poised to become Israel's longest-serving prime minister. Results suggest his right-wing Likud party will be able to muster enough support from other parties on the right to control 65 of the Knesset's 120 seats.
אני מאוד נרגש שעם ישראל שוב נתן בי אמון בפעם החמישית ועוד אמון גדול יותר.
His opponent, former General Benny Gantz, also claimed victory. But he looks more likely to lead a centrist opposition unless he recants on his campaign pledge to never join Netanyahu in a coalition.
אני אהיה ראש הממשלה של כולם ולא רק של אלה שהצביעו לנו.
Netanyahu was criticized for a divisive campaign in which he accused Gantz of conspiring with Arab parties to oust him. That message changed overnight as Netanyahu echoed Gantz's centrist campaign message after results were released.
אבל אני מתכוון להיות ראש הממשלה של כל אזרחי ישראל, ימין ושמאל, יהודים ולא יהודים, כאחד, כל אזרחי ישראל.
Despite his promise to bring the country together, Netanyahu's performance at the polls is widely seen as further proof Israel is shifting to the right. During the campaign, both ends of Israel's political spectrum paid homage to former Prime Minister Menachem Begin. Begin was a nationalist firebrand who expanded illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank and stood against Palestinian independence. Now it seems his once hardline views resemble Israel's political reality.
I think we have just witnessed a clear-cut vote by the Israelis to maintain the status quo as far as we Palestinians are concerned.
Netanyahu has orchestrated the passage of a nation-state law which declares only Jews have the right of self-determination.
זהו רגע מכונן בתולדות הציונות ובתולדות מדינת ישראל.
And during the campaign, he announced he would annex parts of the occupied West Bank. Many saw that promise as a tactic to appease right-wing parties in his coalition. Some include ultranationalists, once on the fringes of mainstream Israeli politics, now positioned as kingmakers in the Knesset. It seems the making of a greater Israel is all but assured. Though how great it will be for the Palestinians is less certain than ever. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Let's bring in our panel. We're joined now by Kobi Michael. He's a senior researcher at the Institute for National Security Studies and the former head of the Palestinian desk at the Israeli Ministry for Strategic Affairs. Ran Bar Yoshafat is the deputy director of Coalet Policy Forum and was a candidate for the New Right Party of Israel. And Ali Abu Nima is the co-founder of electronicintifada.net and author of The Battle for Justice in Palestine. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Kobi, is Netanyahu going to get a fifth term?
Yes, of course. I mean, there is no doubt about it. The question is how long is going to be this term, and I'm not sure that it's going to be so long, because Netanyahu faces two major problems. The first one is, of course, the allegations against him and the resumption of the process in this regard. And the second one is the ultimate deal. And I think that Netanyahu is going to face some major problems, at least with one crucial partner of his new coalition, trying to convince them about the ultimate deal. I think that it will be a pretty hard job for him.
Okay, so Ali Abu Nima, Kobe mentioned the allegations against him, talking about the corruption allegations. These didn't come out after the election. They were there for everybody to see. What the Attorney General had said was before the election anyway. So we look at Israeli politics. Labour seems to be dead and buried. They only got 6 seats. Everybody looked at it and they said there's a centrist coalition of blue and white. And if Netanyahu's talking security, well, here's 3 former IDF chiefs of staff up against him in opposition. And he's got these massive corruption allegations. Despite all of that, he's still on the cusp of becoming prime minister. What does that tell you about Israeli politics in 2019, Ali?
It tells us what we already knew, which is that Israel continues to lurch from far right to even more extreme right. You have a government that is made up of war criminals and killers and racists, and you have an opposition that is made up of war criminals and killers and racists. Let's not forget that Benny Gantz, Netanyahu's main opponent, was Netanyahu's partner in waging the 2014 51-day massacre in Gaza, in which they killed together 551 children, 11 children a day. And Benny Gantz is facing a war crimes case in the Netherlands. He would be very hesitant to get on an aircraft to any countries in Europe. And so for Palestinians, it doesn't make a difference whether it's Netanyahu or Benny Gantz. What we see from the election is that there is no self-correction mechanism in Israel, that any hope for peace and justice has to come through isolating this apartheid regime, in which we saw an election in which only half of those who live under Israeli rule are entitled to vote. Millions of Palestinians are caged in ghettos in Gaza, are surrounded by settlements in the West Bank. The settlers vote in the West Bank, but Palestinians don't get to vote for the military regime that rules every aspect of their lives. So this confirms that Israel is continuing to consolidate its apartheid system, to consolidate extreme right-wing Jewish ultranationalism, in which Israel is ever more confident in colonizing land, annexing land, and the end game ultimately for this regime is to get rid of the Palestinians altogether.
Ron Bar Yoshafat, I'm assuming you disagree with Ali. Come in, give me your take on the elections.
Well, I'm very happy that in Israel we have an elections, because for the Arabs in Gaza and the Arabs in Judea and Samaria, well, they haven't had an election for over a decade. But anyways, to say that Israel is becoming less democratic or more right-wing, the Likud just got more seats, and the seats that it received came from the more right-wing parties. So obviously that's nonsense. But for the rest of the accusations, if Ali Abu Nima wants the Arabs of Judea and Samaria to have the same rights as Jews in Tel Aviv, he's actually saying that he wants to implement the Israeli law over Judea and Samaria, which is what the more right-wing parties in Israel suggest. I'm going to ignore all of the nonsense about massacre and killing people, because obviously it's the exact opposite. It's the Arabs of Gaza who are trying to every day murder
children is not nonsense.
Who are murdered by Hamas. Of course they're not nonsense. They're murdered by Hamas. Hamas literally murdered 200 children when they forced them to dig tunnels. And right now, as we speak, in Hamas, in Gaza, because there are riots, you have Hamas literally shooting civilians. But, you know, the concept of election, you know, it's a novel...
This is a great example of the right-wing
of you interrupting me in the middle of my speech. That's exactly
won't even use the word Palestinians. He talks about the Arabs of Judea and Samaria because he doesn't want to use the word Palestinian.
Okay.
doesn't recognize
the
existence of Palestinians.
Okay, Rambar.
I don't recognize you as a nation, of course not. But the elections, with all due respect, are not the nations.
Ali, give him a second. Ali, give the man. Okay, give the man a second. So,
of the extremism and racism that defines Israeli politics today. He doesn't recognize Palestinians as a people or a nation. He doesn't recognize them as having any rights. So this is, in fact, very helpful.
We have Arabs in the Israeli parliament. You're just interrupting me.
Okay, go ahead, Ron Bar Yoshafat.
We have we have several Arab parties in the Israeli parliament. We also have a lot of Arabs in Israel who are Muslims and Christians.
You wish they weren't there.
Who's saying I wish? Did I say I wish they weren't there? You're just putting words in my mouth. That's really not true. Please let me finish my sentence. It's really not.
Okay, listen, gentlemen. I'll tell you what. There's an additional technical problem here. Hold on, gentlemen.
You have the Arab.
If we can take a breath for a second, it's even harder. It's hard when.
Let me ask your guest. Do you recognize Palestinians as having the right to exist?
I want to finish my sentence.
Ali and Ron, there's an additional technical issue here because when you're both on Skype, it makes it even harder because your audio tends to cancel each other out, right? So, Ron Bar Yoshafat, finish your point. Ali will come back to you, but Ron Bar Yoshafat, go ahead.
In Israel, we have Arab parties. Not only do we have Arab parties, we also have Arab Israeli citizens, Arabs who are Muslims, Arabs who are Christians, who are also running for the elections, not just from the Arab parties, but also from the right-wing parties. You also have Arab Muslims who are running for Likud. You also have Arab Muslims who are running for more right-wing parties. By the way, in Hamas, you would never find a Jew, or under the Palestinian Authority, you will never find a Jew, because that's where you will find the real apartheid. Jews are not allowed in Gaza, and Jews are not allowed in Judea and Samaria. But in Israel, a democracy, again, the concept of election, which hasn't taken place for the Arabs of Gaza or the Arabs of Judea and Samaria for over a decade, I guess it's a novel concept. I do think that the death of every child is horrible. The only problem is that the finger is pointing at the wrong direction. When Hamas is forcing 200 children to dig tunnels and they die while they dig these tunnels for Hamas, that is a war crime.
Okay. Now, let me go back to Kobe Michael here for a second. Ali, I'm going to come to you, right? Kobe Michael, one of the points that Netanyahu made, and one of the reasons why we cover this on an international channel, is because in the build-up to the vote, very close to the vote, he tells Channel 12 that he's going to annex the West Bank settlements. They're illegal under international law. They're at the heart of the dispute, and they're at the heart of the occupation. And he says, who says we can't take them? We're going to annex them, right? Is he going to do that, and what will that mean?
I don't think so, but before replying your question, I would like to address very shortly some of the things that were said by Ali. Most of them are just empty slogans, but I would say that the Arab residents, the Arab citizens of Israel have at least partial responsibility for the results of the last elections due to their decision not to participate in the elections. If they would have participated in the elections in the percentage of the last elections 4 years ago, the picture was totally different. So I think that they have a sort of responsibility in this regard as well. Now, with regard to the annexation, your question, I think that everybody, or almost everybody, understands that Netanyahu's declaration about the annexation was a sort of lip service in order to gain more voters and more people from the right, which is right to the Likud. I think that Netanyahu knows pretty well that the annexation will not work in favor of Israel. I think that he understands what would be the consequences and the ramifications of unilateral annexation. I think that he knows pretty well where he lives, and he knows what is the neighborhood and what are the characteristics and the nature of the neighborhood that he lives in. And I think that if we want to understand what is the real policy and strategy of Netanyahu, we have to look and see what Netanyahu has done in the last 4 years vis-a-vis the Gaza Strip. And I think that he was very constrained and very calculated, and I assume that this will remain his strategy in the soon future.
Ali, when Netanyahu says he wants to annex the settlements, do you take him at his word, or do you think, okay, well, maybe the Israeli analysts are right, maybe it's just lip service ahead of the election?
No, I never look at what Netanyahu or other Israeli leaders say. I look at what they do, and the fact remains that Israel continues to consolidate its occupation and colonization in the West Bank, of course, with a green light from its allies, including the Trump administration, the European Union, and the Saudi regime, which is now a close ally of Israel, who are either giving open or tacit support to Israel as it continues to confiscate Palestinian land and build settlements. So that's the reality. What Israel calls it is of no interest to me. What I look at is what Israel does. So, for example, as Israel was having its election yesterday, the military regime in the occupied West Bank announced the confiscation of several hundred dunams of land from Palestinian farmers in the Jordan Valley to build more roads for Jewish-only settlements. I'm sure that's something that some of your guests would greatly welcome and celebrate. But that's the reality on the ground. We look at facts on the ground, which Israel continues to create. We look at the siege of Gaza, where 2 million people are caged in a large ghetto solely and exclusively because they're not Jewish. Of course, if Palestinians were Jews, Israel would tear down the watchtowers. It would tell the snipers that are murdering children in Gaza to stand down, and it would welcome them back to their lands. But as an apartheid state, Palestinians are kept in the Gaza ghetto solely and exclusively because they are not Jewish. And both of your guests, of course, we have a rather lopsided panel, so I want to take a moment to respond. Both of your guests try to dismiss what I say as slogan and nonsense. Of course, when I talk about 551 children killed in Gaza, it's not me talking, it's the independent UN Commission of Inquiry. When I talk about children being killed over the last year in Gaza, intentionally killed, it's not me, it's the newest UN Independent Commission of Inquiry, which called for arrests of Israeli leaders who are responsible for ordering snipers to kill protesters, unarmed protesters, in the Gaza ghetto. So these are the facts. And of course, I know the response from the guests. It will be, oh, the UN, it is biased. The UN, it's anti-Semitic. It's full of anti-Semites who hate Jews. But the fact is, Israel and extremists like the ones on your panel who don't even recognize the existence of Palestinians cannot keep claiming that the entire world is wrong, only they are right, and that Palestinians must live for another decade or 2 decades or 3 decades without any rights. Of course, there aren't elections under a military occupation. Okay. The French did not have elections under military occupation. And I want to say that, we hear these slogans all the time attacking the Palestinian Authority. I'm no fan of the Palestinian Authority, but I'll tell you who the biggest fans are of the Palestinian Authority. It's the Israeli government, because despite their attacks on the Palestinian Authority and their slogans against it, the Israeli army, the Shin Bet, the occupation forces continue to cooperate very closely with the Palestinian Authority, who are their main asset in maintaining the occupation. And the last thing Israel would want is an election in which its allies in the Palestinian Authority are defeated. Because when that happened last time, Israel suppressed the election result.
Ron?
We all know it.
Okay, Ron?
Well, the only thing I will agree with Ali Abu Nima, which I think should get a trophy for the amount of lies he just said, is that let's destroy the Palestinian Authority. I think it's a horrible institute. I think it's a terrorist institute, which basically says
they're going to give. I didn't say let's destroy it.
Please stop interrupting me. You just. I've heard the amount of lies that you said, and I think you really deserve a prize for being #1 liar in the world. But I would like to answer. And the thing is that the Palestinian Authority.
You can't refute one fact I stated.
I will, because if it were as horrible as you said, we wouldn't have a conflict. We would conquer Gaza in an hour. We don't want to do it because we don't want to harm the innocent civilians who are in Gaza, who are right now being harmed by Hamas. You wanted to disprove what you've said. You said you don't have elections in Gaza. You had elections in Gaza. That's how Hamas gained power. But after they gained power, they stopped having elections. You say you don't have elections under the PA. That's how the PA got power. They had elections. Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Allah, was elected, and then you've never had elections. I can continue in this. I can continue to dispute all of your lies. I can continue to dispute all of your lies, but you're not letting me speak.
Okay,
you're being very rude. And
Ali, give the man a chance. Ali, give the man a chance.
He just said that people cannot see his lies, but when I do, he interrupts me. So let me finish.
Give the man a chance, Ali. Go ahead, Ron.
The Palestinian Authority pays 5 times more money if you murder an Israeli and you sit in the Israeli prison. It's a terrorist organization, and that's why they continue to win in their non-elections.
This is not worth listening to. It's not worth listening to. It's not worth our time to listen to this propaganda from somebody who admits
you're a propaganda machine.
Palestinians don't.
And I just want to add a few historical facts. There was never a state called Palestine before 1948. There was nothing with a Palestinian connotation that didn't mean Jews. Under Hamas, they say in their charter to murder Jews wherever they are.
Listen, gentlemen, I want to bring it back to the very beginning. Hold on, I want to bring it back to the very beginning. Kobe Michael. Okay, listen. I mean, we're going to go down this rabbit hole, and we could go on forever and ever. Kobe Michael, I want to bring you in. With regards to these elections, as the coalitions start to happen now, the most likely coalition seems to be that Netanyahu gets his right-wing coalition, and that will mean what for the foreseeable future, Kobe? Final answer.
As I told you before, I think that it's not going to be a very long and sustaining future, because as I mentioned, I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to face at least 2 major obstacles. One is the ultimate deal, Trump plan, and the other one is the allegations against him. But I think that this coalition will be able, in its short time, even of 1 year, to do some things that will affect the internal issues, the domestic issues, much more than the external issues. But maybe in a very paradoxical manner, I think that this coalition, and mainly Netanyahu, after the support that he gained in this election, I think that we might reach to a sort of a calm agreement with Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and it will be maybe a bit easier for Netanyahu to reach to such an agreement.
Okay, that could be interesting. Okay, that could be an interesting paradox if it does happen, because security and being tough on Gaza was central to his electoral campaign. Listen, I'm out of time, gentlemen. Look forward to having you back on the program. Kobe Michael, Ron Bar Yoshafat, and Ali Abudima.
Interrupting. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us. Still to come, the battle for Tripoli escalates as Khalifa Haftar's rebel forces regroup to make a move on the capital, as the international community need to intervene in Libya again. And seeing the unseeable, we ask an astrophysicist what the first ever photo of a black hole tells us about the universe. Libya is on the brink of its most serious showdown since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi. Heavily armed rival fighters are descending on the capital, Tripoli. Rebel leader Khalifa Haftar and his Libyan National Army are on the outskirts of the city. They have threatened to take the capital and overthrow the internationally recognized government. The World Health Organization says civilians, doctors, and hospitals are being targeted, and dozens of people have been killed. And despite continued efforts by the United Nations, the demands for dialogue have been powerless to stop the fighting. So, should world powers intervene in Libya again? Melinda Nusifora takes a look.
Driving head-on into a battle for the capital. Every skirmish over the past 8 years seems to have been building up to this. Since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, Libya has been controlled by two competing governments. Now, they're on the verge of an urban war in the heart of Tripoli.
We are now trying to destroy very large parts of the enemy forces outside the city of Tripoli, so they become weak inside the city.
Last week, fighting on the outskirts of the capital escalated. Each day, enemy forces inch closer as the battle for control over the oil-rich country reaches its peak. On one side is Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj, the leader of the internationally recognised government of national accord. On the other, military strongman Khalifa Haftar, the self-appointed militia leader of the Libyan National Army. He has promised to rid Libya of extremists who, he says, control the GNA. But his critics say his campaign is nothing more than a power grab.
We are pledging to our people that we will preserve the civil state. We are inviting the delusional and the brainwashed to surrender their weapons. The battle is over, and we will not allow the militarization of the nation. Libya will not be a military state.
The United Nations says street battles have already forced thousands of people from their homes. But most remain trapped in the city after Haftar's militia launched an airstrike on Tripoli's only civilian airport. The World Health Organization says aid workers and hospitals have also been hit.
Intentionally targeting civilians or civilian objects, as well as indiscriminate attacks, may amount to war crimes.
The situation has become so volatile, the UN has postponed next week's highly anticipated political conference in Libya. It was hoped the talks would set the stage for democratic elections by the end of the year. That now seems unlikely.
Whatever happens, the UN will remain committed, and I will remain committed to support the Libyan people. Libyans deserve peace, security, prosperity, and the respect of their human rights.
But UN members can't agree on how to deliver it. Haftar is supported by Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, France and Russia, while Sarraj has the backing of the UK, Germany and the United States. With such deep external divisions, fostering internal peace is even harder. Melinda Nusafora, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Jonathan Weiner. He was the U.S. Special Envoy for Libya. In Tunis is Juma Al-Gamati. He's the head of Libya's Tahrir Party and a member of the UN-backed political dialogue group. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Juma, Haftar has moved on Tripoli. Do you believe that he's willing to destroy Tripoli in order to retake it?
I think Haftar will spare nothing to achieve his goal of taking over Tripoli. So far, his military campaign, the indiscriminate attack and bombardment, the lack of any care about the human aspect of it, the humanitarian aspect of his operation, his air bombardment of the civilian airport while passenger flights are landing and taking off, shows that the man doesn't care about any consequences as long as he achieves his goal of taking over Tripoli and hence take over Libya and establish his dream of the one-man military absolute rule.
Jonathan Weiner, we have strong, credible reports that the French, the Italians, and the UK all tried to convince him otherwise a few weeks ago. He'd signaled his intent to move on Tripoli. They tried to say, please don't do it. They could not. The international community is condemning him now. The UN Secretary General saying, please stop. He's not stopping. What gives him the confidence?
Well, he saw what Gaddafi did in 1969, which is declare that he was taking over the country, take the TV stations and radio stations, and it all fell. It all magically collapsed, and Gaddafi then ruled for 42 years, becoming not only powerful but very wealthy and potentially establishing a dynasty. This is what is in General Khalifa Haftar's head, I believe. I spent time with him. I was told in November 2016 he was going to invade and take Tripoli in December 2016. I told him not to do it, red light. I told his military advisor and sons, red light, don't do it. We organized every other country with an interest in Libya to tell him the same thing, and he didn't do it.
And now that he doesn't want to do it, do you think, Jonathan, this is a fight to the finish? You think he's done with talking?
Well, he's never been willing to actually compromise on this issue of whether he was going to run the country or not as its sole determinant dictator. He doesn't believe the country's ready for democracy. He said that to me. The politicians are no good. I'll make Libya safe and secure from the terrorists and Islamists. I'll get rid of them all, and they can do health care and education, and we'll have military governors in place. That's how he wants to approach things.
Juma, so the GNC has been trying to negotiate with him under Siraj. There has been a process over the past couple of years. Has that all been a waste of time now? And might it be a case where you're also outgunned by him because he's moving fast and swallowing up a lot of ground?
Well, first of all, reports today in the media and other sources confirm that over the last 4 or 5 years, Haftar has never been serious about dialogue, about a political settlement, about a political deal. He has been, in fact, engaging in these sort of political dialogues simply to just waste time for the other side and to gain time on his side to prepare for this operation, which he sees as the final step of him taking over. So I think he dealt with Sarraj and others with dishonesty, with deceit, when he explicitly expressed that he's willing to support a political deal, but actually implicitly and in reality he was never genuinely serious about that, and his intentions were never for a political settlement but were always for a military showdown to take over the country by force. So now we are faced with this situation where in essence we have only two choices: either Haftar succeeds and he takes over Tripoli and he establishes his military dictatorship and one-man rule, and we regress back to the era of Gaddafi, or we fight him and then we defeat him, and then the other discourse which the majority of Libyans who are engaged in the political process want, which is to move forward to establish a civilian rule, a democratic state, a state based on rule of law, and building an institutional state, a state based on institutions and rule of law. So really, we don't have a third choice, unfortunately, and it's up to the Libyans to unite and to show resolve and to fight his campaign. Otherwise, I think Libya is doomed. I think it's futile to actually count on the international community, because I believe that they are divided, and countries like France, I think, are giving him a tacit support, and I think implicitly they have given him the green light to go ahead and try this campaign.
Okay, so Jonathan Weiner, let me bring to your attention that joint statement about Libya by France, Italy, the UAE, the UK, and the US. We believe strongly that there is no military solution to the Libya conflict. Our governments oppose any military action in Libya. How can any Libyans take that statement seriously when at least two of those governments in that joint statement support Haftar, whether tacitly or overtly?
Well, support is a big word, and it encompasses a lot of different things. And you've left out Russia, which has really played a very substantial role in Haftar's success by funding it with billions of dollars worth of counterfeit dinars that have been in circulation now since the spring of 2016, which played a substantial role in Haftar's ability to build patronage networks and to function. But I think that the support has been for what both have seen as counter-terrorist operations in Benghazi. I have no reason to believe that any of these countries supported the attack on Tripoli. I know some people think maybe they did. I don't. I've seen them support some things and not support others. I think they have been playing with fire with Haftar. I think he makes his own decisions ultimately based on his mixture of military and political calculations. And those calculations are not always right. I mean, he did declare a coup in February 2014 on radio. Nobody followed, or on television, nobody followed the coup. And he moved east, built some foreign support, built some domestic support from people in the east who felt aggrieved by the West getting more during the Gaddafi years. And we've seen what happened since. He did a 3-year siege of Benghazi. 3 years.
Jumal Gamati, right. So Jumal Gamati, at the moment, there's no clear evidence that the French, the Russians, the Egyptians, the Emiratis have actually given the man the green light. Can you accept that?
Well, I think the French vetoed a statement by the European Union a few days ago in which they were going to include Haftar by name in the statement and call upon him to cease military operations and go back to the positions before this latest military campaign started. Also, in the last meeting of the Security Council, I think Russia vetoed the same thing, objected to including or naming Haftar by name. We know very well that the Emiratis have always given him all sorts of support, not just political, but also military, financial, media, intelligence, and logistical support. And so does Egypt and possibly other Gulf countries as well. So the French ambassador, the lady in Tripoli, unfortunately has been quoted in meetings where she thinks that Haftar taking over Libya and, in her eyes, stabilizing the country might not be a bad option. So all reports point that the French are actually counting on Haftar to take over and stabilize Libya, and obviously in that way he will secure their interest. And we know that there is a big competition between the French and the Italians over Libya. That has not been a secret. That has been very overt and open over the last year or two.
Juma, how do you feel about the fact that some believe that Libya is the type of country where, well, maybe it doesn't need democracy, maybe it needs a strong man like Haftar. That's why he'll get rid of the extremist Islamists and he'll keep the place stable. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's an insult to any human being on earth to say that they don't need democracy. Because what does democracy mean? It means human rights, guaranteeing human rights. It means guaranteeing freedoms. It means guaranteeing dignity. It means guaranteeing all aspects of economic, political, social, and intellectual rights. I think it's intrinsic in all human beings to live free and enjoy justice. So to say that Libyans don't need democracy or other people don't need democracy, it's an insult. Why don't we let the Libyans themselves decide whether they need democracy or not? The majority, overwhelming majority of Libyans have been engaged in a process over the last few years in this transition since 2011. They have been engaged in a process to come up, to craft a constitution, to come up with a democratic constitution, to initiate state building, to actually set up a civilian rule based on state institutions, rule of law, respect of human rights, guaranteeing freedoms, because this is the only thing that can guarantee justice and fight corruption and allow people to enjoy their wealth and actually prosper. This is proved all over the world. You only need to compare between the democratic world and the non-democratic world. You only look at North Korea and South Korea to see the benefits of democracy. Libyans are not stupid. The young generations of Libyans are highly educated and they know what's going on in the world. And what they want is democracy and not going back to dictatorship.
Let me go back to Jonathan Weiner. So we look at Haftar trying to take over Tripoli, and the obvious question is, does Siraj's government need international help? After everything that happened in 2011 and the aftermath, where people said, yes, we ousted Gaddafi with the greatest military force on the planet with NATO. Afterwards, Barack Obama, David Cameron, everybody signaled regret that the West bungled that process. Is there any country willing to go and help the GNC militarily now?
Oh, militarily, I think it would be a very bad idea. What we need is to have no one intervening militarily on any side. The fighting needs to stop. The conflict needs to stop. Libyans of Tripoli, from Misrata and from Zintan, are all coming together to fight the forces from the east. There are three possibilities here. One is that there'll be a standoff and there'll be a long siege as there was in Benghazi. That would be absolutely horrific for Libya. Horrific for the world, horrific for North Africa, the Sahel. It would just be catastrophic. The second possibility is that they repel General Haftar and chase him and his forces back some considerable distance, and he's irretrievably weakened. And this challenge to democracy ends that way. The third possibility is that there is a ceasefire and a pullback from Haftar, and that political negotiations resume with everyone having learned something from this. I would like to see as little bloodshed and conflict as possible and to have this over as quickly as possible. But I'm not going to be the one who gets to decide. The Libyans are going to decide. It won't be foreigners. No, what foreigners can do is to tell Libyans, cut it out. They can tell Haftar, stop, pull back, and pull all support for him. That is what France needs to do and communicate very clearly privately as well as publicly. That is what the Emiratis and Egyptians hopefully are already doing privately. I have very little hopes that's what Russia will do, but maybe they would as well.
Juma Al-Gamati, can Siraj's GNC conduct its volcano of anger and win without outside help?
Well, the overmajority of people, especially in the west of Libya, from Misrata all the way to the Tunisian border and all the cities and towns in the Nafusa mountain, have no choice now. It's make or break. It's to be or not to be. They have all mobilized their forces now to stand up to Haftar, who came from over 1,000 kilometers to take over the capital, a capital that houses 3 million people, almost half of the Libyan population. We have to stand up to him and defeat him. If we defeat him, he's finished and he's out of the whole scene, and then we can get on with the job of ending this transition, with building the state we aspire to. If he wins, unfortunately, it's a doomsday. We all lose. We go back to the days of Gaddafi, to dictatorship, to tyranny, and to horrific human rights violations, and the dream of the young Libyans who participated in the revolution of 2011 is all shattered.
Okay, gentlemen, I've got to move on. And full disclosure, we had a guest who was a little more sympathetic towards Haftar and his intentions, from Tobruk. And as you both know, we tried for about 30 minutes before the segment started and throughout the segment to bring him in, but there were audio issues. It would have been interesting to hear his perspective, but perhaps next time. We'll be watching Libya very closely here on the Newsmakers. For the moment, let me thank you, Jonathan Weiner and Juma Al-Gamati. It's been a pleasure.
The strongest evidence that we have to date for the existence of black holes. And it is also consistent, the shape of this shadow, to the precision of our measurements with Einstein's predictions.
Since Albert Einstein published his theory of general relativity in 1915, scientists have been on a 100-year mission to prove him wrong or right. And today, they've taken one step closer to confirming that the genius had been right all along by capturing the first ever photograph of a black hole. It was captured by a global network of telescopes called the Event Horizon Telescope. This black hole is 55 million light years from Earth and has a mass 6.5 billion times that of the Sun. And its round shape proves that Einstein's theory, that has formed the basis of our understanding of the universe, is true. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Atlanta, Georgia, by Laura Seward-Forsyth. She's the founder of the space analysis and consulting firm Astralytica. Laura, are you excited?
I'm very excited. This is a great moment for humanity. We've never before seen a black hole. And so this is a very exciting time for all of us who have been studying astrophysics really for centuries.
Right.
It is a pivotal moment.
Right. So, I mean, I guess it's kind of paradoxical that you can't quite have a proper image of a black hole, because a black hole per se is something from which even light can't escape, right? So what we're looking at is a black hole from a distance and the stuff that surrounds it. What are we seeing when we see this photograph?
What we see is the material that is surrounding the black hole called an accretion disk, and it is falling into the event horizon. So the telescope is called the Event Horizon Telescope. It doesn't directly image a black hole per se, because that's impossible as far as we know. It images the event horizon, that point, that boundary where light can no longer escape. And so it is imaging that boundary of a black hole, and we're seeing the silhouette of the black hole with all the material that is falling into the black hole, surrounding it and glowing.
And tell me why this is an absolute confirmation of all the math and the theory that came before it.
Right. So even Einstein wasn't sure that black holes existed. He thought it was maybe a byproduct of the mathematics that we use for modeling our universe. And so it took us over 100 years now to actually directly image a black hole. Previously, we had only indirectly imaged it. And so now we see, finally, using radio interferometry, the image of this black hole silhouette. And so we are actually viewing directly a black hole, at least the point where the light can come to us, that point, that boundary, that we can actually view it. That is what we are seeing. And so this is the very first time we've ever been able to see this. And so this is actual direct evidence that these phenomena exist. We've got one in the center of our own galaxy. The one that we view today, that one is much larger than the one that's in our galaxy. It is M87 is what we call it, and it is huge. And so it's just amazing that we can visualize something that is so far away. And bring it to our telescopes, bring it to our eyes, per se.
And the fact that it's much bigger, is that the reason why we decided to focus on that and not the one that's at the center of our galaxy, which, if I remember correctly, is only 100,000 light years away? This is 55 million, right? So is it because it's bigger, it's more capable of being seen?
Right. So this telescope has gathered over 2 years a huge amount of data. And it looked at both this one image of this black hole, this M87. It also looked at Sagittarius A star, which is the one in the center of our galaxy. And this is the first one that we've been able to directly see, because it is so much larger, because it is so much more powerful. And they're still looking at the images of Sagittarius A star in the hopes that they will be able to have another image like the one that we see today.
Yeah, and one of the things a lot of people didn't get when they watched Interstellar, right, was when they visualized a black hole, it was a sphere, right? And I guess because in 2 dimensions, we were always used to this idea of our sort of space being a kind of pool, and a black hole would be like a drain that sort of sucks things down, right? Just explain to me why it's this spherical thing from which energy, matter, and light can be sucked in from all directions.
Right. If you're imagining a black hole just based on a textbook, that's 2-dimensional. You have to think about the universe as 3-dimensional. This is, in a sense, a sphere. A singularity is an actual point, and the event horizon is the sphere around that point. And we don't understand the math and the physics in that singularity. And so the only thing that we can really understand is what's happening at the event horizon and beyond. And so what you're seeing right now on the screen are these jets coming out of or at least a black hole that is like M87, which is another thing that we're trying to understand. It's not just the event horizon and the sphere, it's also the accretion disk, and it's the jets that come out of it, these powerful eruptions of energy and material that come out of these black holes. And we're still trying to understand the physical mechanisms and all the information that we can get from the evidence that we gather from these telescopes.
Right. Is this giving us any indication, even though we're only looking at what's cooking on the sides before it sort of goes in, right? Does this in any way still give us even the smallest fraction of an idea closer to what's actually happening inside? What happens to matter? What happens to light once it goes inside a black hole?
Yeah, we certainly hope so. So we want to understand what is a black hole, what is going on inside there, inside the event horizon. And in order to do that, we look at the very boundaries. And Stephen Hawking, for example, had some theories about some material that could possibly escape. And we've never directly seen that. So maybe finding more evidence for those kinds of particles, or finding other evidence for things we hadn't even thought of before. And this is why we use these telescopes to explore the universe, is we want to understand the world around us. We want to understand the physical mechanisms that cause these black holes to happen so that we better understand the world in which we live in. And we want to understand also what we see when we look at the gravitational lensing effects, for example. We understand that gravity bends light, and we can use that to our advantage, and we have used that to our advantage to see farther into the universe than we could otherwise. And so understanding how we can use these things to our benefit is also very helpful in being able to understand what else is out there.
And what do you think the likes of Einstein or Stephen Hawking or Carl Sagan would have thought of what we just saw today?
Oh, they would have loved it. So one of the things about being a scientist is you have to use the information that you have in front of you. But if you could travel 100 years, hundreds of years, thousands of years in the future, then you're going to want to ask some questions of the scientists in the future. What do you see? What are the tools available to you? What data do you have available to you? So I think any scientist from the past, whether it's Carl Sagan or Stephen Hawking or Einstein himself, would have been thrilled at this discovery.
Laura Seaward-Forsyth, always a pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, Belgium apologizes for its kidnapping of Congolese children during colonial rule. But does just saying sorry go far enough in making amends? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.